camera and I put fresh batteries in it this morning, and I was filming for literally 1 minute.
Oh, you're part of this endeavor.
No, I'm not.
He's not.
Probably Mondra.
Jesse's just getting his burger.
Okay, that's fine.
Might take some notes though.
So I'm gonna do like a clap really quick to see how it's picking me up.
Okay.
And
Yes,
then,
you can see me.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna clap and then it'll create the synchronization.
And if my nose starts running, obviously, somebody please tell me.
Okay.
I am that vain.
Yeah, and if
I
you
know I
want
don't seem like it, but I am.
That's like not
sit
a vain
sideways
thing.
or
It's like a normal,
like talk to everybody who's here. You don't even have to worry about the camera necessarily.
Okay, cool.
Okay, I'm gonna do the clap really quick. Nope, that wasn't loud enough. That should be good.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a jump.
All right.
Cool. Okay. So, I mean, if you just want to start with like introducing yourself and like how you would identify yourself, like I'm a lawyer, I'm an activist, or however you want to.
Sure. My name is Elise Keaton. In the capacity I am here this weekend, I'm a volunteer for the Keeper of the Mountains Foundation. I am an environmental activist. I am also a lawyer. I always say that's my formal training is in the law, but I've never practiced law. I've never litigated, so I always use those skills in other arenas.
Yeah.
And I'm from Southern West Virginia originally, and I live there now. And I went out and lived in a lot of other places and came home here.
Awesome. All right, and so we were talking about, you know, living and being from West Virginia. You have this myth that's been assigned to you guys, and you described it as the myth of inbred hillbilly. But you also explained that that is like fundamentally rooted in the coal industry. So I was hoping you could like just articulate like what it means to have that history related to coal,
Sure.
especially like just kinship wise and just identity wise.
Well, I feel as though there's always been a kind of a mythology around Appalachia as it relates to birth defects and the implications of inbreeding and backwoods and tight families and things like that. And it was something that, you know, I heard as a kid growing up, and I kind of took on as part of who I was. It just seemed like an accepted part of our identity. And I went out into the world feeling as though I had to represent that differently. I had to be a better hillbilly, so to speak. You know, I had to be an articulate, smart hillbilly. And when I returned to West Virginia and really started looking at the work again with seasoned eyes and, you know, an adult mind, it occurred to me that we have high levels of birth defects in these communities with exposure to coal toxins. And that's under strict regulations. So if there were no regulations 100 years ago and all of those toxins were going into the air and water unchecked, it seems like we would have had a greater instance of birth defects. And if anyone raised a flag about that, it was very easy for an industry to say, oh, those people, they inbreed. That's why there are so many. And that's a distasteful thing. It's disgusting. People don't want to think about it. And so it's easy to shut it out of your mind and say, oh, yeah, and think about something else.
Perfect. All right, and so when we also talked about the ideas of like wealth and how like they maybe back in the day when like coal companies were really at their highest, like respectability wise, wage wise, like the idea was to kind of achieve that like American dream, like the wealth in terms of like material wealth and like being able to have like a higher stature in, I guess, a society or whatever. But you also talk about how currently you're kind of reworking those notions and how you're talking about not even like reasonable wealth, but also like a different sort of wealth. So I was wondering if you could kind of like talk about that.
Yeah, this idea occurred to me. I was at the University of Ohio for a conference on the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty, and I heard a speaker talk about a lot of the literature reflects the sentiment that the people in Appalachia are poor because they choose to be. And what they meant by that is they refuse to assimilate into a broader economy. And when I heard that, I thought about myself, and I thought, well, it's not a refusal to assimilate, it's that I identify wealth differently. I feel as though access to resources that are necessary for life is wealth. And it's not numbers in a bank account for me. It's something very different and fundamental to being a human being. And it occurred to me that that's part of my cultural upbringing. So there's a broad part of my culture that just they define wealth differently than an economic market-based definition, and I think there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah, and I love that too, because it's like the narrative really is that upward mobility thing, but even back in the day, the example I was using, like, that's not necessarily true. Like, I remember watching this documentary and the woman was kind of just like, I just want indoor plumbing for my kids. But that's not like, I want a Corvette, you know what I mean? So like that, I think, is like really unique to the culture here. So I think that was really good. We also talked about like what's also really unique to West Virginia, and is this idea that home ownership is really, like, it's high in West Virginia. Like, and you would go around, I feel like, ask anybody in any other states, say like West Virginia, like, oh, they, like, how could they own homes? They're so poor there, or like, no way, or whatever. And I think that that was like a really interesting fact that you brought up, is that home ownership here is really high.
Yeah, so, and I think that also stems from the fact that homes are passed down from generation to generation here, more so than in other states. We have a lot of families on land that have been there for hundreds of years, literally. And so not only do they own that home, they own a big chunk of property that they can farm and that, you know, supplies them with what they need. And people often say, well, if this is so bad, if mining is so bad and you know it's going to happen, why would you stay? Why wouldn't you just move somewhere else where it's not happening? Well, when you think about uprooting from a place where you own your home, you own your land, it completely supports you, and thinking about having to purchase a home, purchase land, purchase food, purchase water, where is that money going to come from? And people just assume that it appears, you just go get a job and it happens, but they don't understand that we come from a different ethos. We see our role with our land as a symbiotic relationship. It's not that we exploit it, it's that it supports us. Larry Gibson, one of his famous quotes, my mother gave me birth, but the land gives me life. You live on this land. It feeds you. The trees create your oxygen. The mountains gave you water. The bounty of the forest gives you nutrients, you know? It's important.
Yeah, definitely. And so knowing that, like, it is so rooted in this kind of like owning your land, and the land kind of like owning you, and not in like a really like depressing or demonstrative. Okay, words are really great for me right now.
None of us slept well last
Yeah,
night.
like not in like that dominating form, but like in this like kind of like symbiotic, relationship. Knowing that, and then explaining, like, I would, you can use as many examples as you want of environmental degradation that you can bring down to like this idea that, like, what are the fundamental human right maybe is like being exploited, and it's not going to be useful to any of us, and the industry is like creating this really horrible thing. Like, if you wanted to use like 3 big examples and like bring them down to there, or use as many as you want, I'm probably gonna like cut it down to like 3 or 4 just to keep like the video, like, you know what I mean? So pick your favorites. If they're like 10 of them, perfect, then that'll give us a lot.
And so you want me to break it down? Explain that to me again.
To like bring it down to like explain those examples, and then bring it down to this idea that like this is going to affect us all eventually.
Okay. Well, I think, you know, my background is in mountaintop removal, but in the recent year we've learned that there are huge export natural gas pipelines proposed for some of our most pristine areas. These are ecological hotspots. When you look at biodiversity, these are red splotches on the map. I mean, ancient mountains with untouched watersheds. I mean, it's spectacular. And the idea is that these pipelines are necessary to capitalize on the natural gas reserves under the state of West Virginia, and the only way to do that is to pump it out and export it to other markets. So the impact here is that we bear the brunt of the extraction. We deal with the polluted water, we deal with the polluted air, we deal with the lack of jobs. Wetzel County produces billions of cubic feet of natural gas and has the highest unemployment rate in the state. Why is that? Out-of-state workers. The industry is a profit-driven industry, and if a different out-of-state company can bid a contract, they're going to get it if it's lower. So the impact on us locally is we bear all the cost and none of the benefit. And now they want to magnify that with these huge export lines. And so to understand that. And then you can go from that microcosm to a macrocosm and say, well, what I'm doing is directly related to what Putin has done in Crimea. Directly. The United States is positioning itself to provide natural gas to European markets to compete with Russia. Okay, wow, now what? You know? So to the international conversation is important as well. And then another example, I think, more recently, the lack of a communication about real opportunity in this state, and a conversation dominated by an industry at a political level, at a media level, at a social level, at a religious level, in the church conversations. You know, I mean, there's just a dishonesty happening, and that is harmful to communities, because what we see here is it turns people who should be relating to each other, who are impacted in identical ways, it turns them against each other and pits their interests against one another, when that's a false fight.
Yeah.
These miners and the environmentalists have way more in common than they don't. And that's what's been lost. And I'm hopeful, though. I mean, I love my community, and I know that when I just smile and talk about things that, you know, matter to me as a human being, there's something that really beautiful occurs with a relationship with my community. And I always say that if you want to change this world, be in a relationship with one another and in relationship with your community, not via text message or email. Coffee is a great way to get to know your neighbors.
Perfect. Yeah, honestly, that was, I mean, I think that's everything we wanted to do. Yeah, you know, and like we brought it down, like I explained to you in the outline of what I thought the next part of this documentary would be to reclaim and redefine wealth, livelihood, and experience in West Virginia, and I think that you did a really succinct description. Yeah, oh, do you want to ask more questions? Oh my God.
You've already answered this yesterday, but yesterday we spoke a little bit about your involvement in politics locally, and I know just now you were speaking about community involvement. Could you explain a little bit more about what you were talking about yesterday about your involvement with the local Green Party?
Absolutely. So I was elected state executive chair of the local Green Party, the Mountain Party of West Virginia. And I became involved with the Mountain Party because they reflected my values more closely than the other two political parties in the state. And what I saw was a 15-year-old party that has a really strong leadership base that is disconnected from the community.